Welcome back to your next episode. I'm Louise.
And I'm Amy. Hi.
Hi. And,
how are you doing?
well, I'd say hi to you. Yeah, hi to everybody as well. Yes, I'm doing very well. Are you well?
I'm good. There's just that hope in the air, isn't there, Louise?
Yeah, there is. What, of going out and about and we can have six in the garden?
I've just seen a few flowers. The sun is shining. It is forecast to snow this weekend, so let's not get out of our box.
God.
But there just feels like maybe...
It doesn't matter what the weather's going to be like because we're all going to be round in each other's gardens anyway, aren't we?
That's true.
So, shall we just get straight on and introduce who we've got on today? So, journalist and founder of the Book of Man website. His name's Martin Robinson. He's also the author of a book called You're Not the Man You Are Supposed to Be, The Chaos of Modern Masculinity, which is... very funny and friendly book. There's been a lot of scrutiny about male behaviour at the moment, and it's like every week it's building. So this is a perfect time to chat to him. So that's coming up next.
Hi, Martin. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Can we talk first of all about the Book of Man website? It's quite interesting because I know your background is in magazines and I love it. It's got a really sort of editorial look towards it, but that's me looking at style over the actual content, and the content is really, really good as well. It's a very inclusive hub, I guess, because it's not purely a male space, but it is a place where men are sort of encouraged to share their stories and stuff. How did that come about, and who are you really sort of targeting that at?
Well, I mean, it came out of me working in men's magazines for 25 years or something, various incarnations of men's magazines, music magazines. And it sort of came from me having lost my big editor job and sort of was out of work for a couple of years just looking after my kids at home. And I kind of realised that there was no particular... place where you could get advice on things like how you look after kids and how you deal with a job loss and depression and things like that come with it. And then it just occurred to me that men's magazines have never really looked at those kind of issues. It's generally about the display and suits and the cars and the watches and that kind of thing, not what's going on in your heads. It's like that was a bit of a taboo, really. Certainly in media, at least. So I thought it'd be really interesting to do that. All the things that we couldn't do before, let's just do that. And of course, it was kind of in the air at the time anyway, and still is. So it sort of came off the back of the Me Too movement as well, where male behaviour was really under scrutiny. And also the mental health sort of crisis, as it was particularly called at the time. And the male suicide statistic was really kind of like hit the headlines, I think, thanks to the work of Calm. So it was all in the air. So it felt like a great time to kind of bring this together. So, I mean, it's properly targeted at, it was specifically, I suppose, for about 25 to 50-year-old men, sort of adult men, basically. But it's pretty much for everyone. And I think the space is there, as you say, to include all genders, and I think we've learned that that's a big part of it. And actually half of our audience are women. And we get a lot of mums and girlfriends. Interested in this and looking at how they should deal with their lads and fathers even.
It's so ironic, Martin, that back in the day, because I'm of that era, like reading FHM, pouring through Mixmag to see what's going on, and everybody like off their tits at the weekend and then having the worst come down on the Tuesday. But don't talk about it. Let's just see where we're going on Friday night. It's so crazy that's what it was like, wasn't it? Nobody was talking about I guess, was it all put down to sort of like having caned it too much at the weekend? Nobody was really talking about these issues, were they?
No, not at all. No, it was complete hedonism. It was really, I worked at Maxim, which was like the third best or worst one, it was, depending on your perspective. But it was kind of like loaded FHM and there was Maxim. And it was just all purely about drinking. I mean, as soon as I discovered how to really drink heavily every single day, I started getting promoted like almost on a monthly basis. Wow. I realised that work was kind of immaterial, and that actually my ability to booze and be a bit of a laugh was the key thing. And that was completely projected in sort of everything that you do. But the weird thing was, I noticed as I was quite young at the time, just in my early 20s, that people in the office would suddenly have breakdowns. Like people would just go, would just disappear, and you'd be like, "Where's?" The
chair would be empty. You'd be like, "What happened to Dave? We don't talk about what happened to Dave."
But it was. It's like your art director would suddenly be like gone. And you'd be like, "What happened to him?" And it'd be like, "Oh, he just like lost it,
burnout."
Just went mad, just went crazy, and it kept on happening. And you just go, "That's really strange. I hope that doesn't happen to me," kind of thing. And then you realise that, of course, you're dealing with only a very limited part of a life, of a human life, and there are consequences from just living that kind of lifestyle and living under those kind of pressures. But also just that generally you're dealing with people, and these things happen to people all the time. It's just there was no way at all of addressing that situation. They were
in that culture, you couldn't have sat in a meeting and said, "Guys, I think maybe we should have a section just dedicated." They'd be like, "Get out, Martin."
just no way. No way. It's really like, even relatively late in my career, I'd be working on magazines that were quite metrosexual, but it'd still be like, fundamentally, it's gangster films and beer. Yeah, that's what men are interested in. Don't do anything from there. So with the Book of Man, it's a great joy to be able to do all this other stuff.
How liberating to be able to talk about this stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. So can we talk about the book now? So you're not the man you are supposed to be. The Chaos of Modern Masculinity. It's very funny and very friendly, a very sort of friendly approach, and you include yourself in it as kind of like a dysfunctional male, but it's sensitive, and it's a very informed look at the concept of masculinity at this moment in time. And as you said just now, there's a lot of scrutiny on male behaviour, and it's just building all the time. So who is the book for?
The book is for men. It's for men who are probably going to be interested in this area of male behaviour, but not fully kind of understand everything that's going on. There's a sense of people wanting change and change happening, whether we like it or not, and a lot of men dealing with mental health. And it's kind of a look at, how we kind of should get our heads around this and understand it rather than reject it, because I think a lot of the loudest men's voices at the moment are kind of on the side of what you might call the backlash, who are very resistant to any kind of change, very alarmed by sort of feminism, very alarmed by wokeness and all these kind of labels that are sort of flying around everywhere. And I think that's quite a destructive way of looking at it, rather than sort of listening to perhaps what other people are saying, other genders and people from different kinds of backgrounds, and trying to look at how, well, not only would it be good to kind of look at ourselves as men and where we come from and why we perhaps act the way we do, for the benefit of other people, but also for ourselves. Like, would things look like not everyone is particularly happy, and there's immense social change going on, and it's a bit of a strain. So how can we make sense of this? I mean, of course, one of the running jokes throughout the whole book is that men aren't particularly interested in issues around masculinity. So, but I'm trying to make it fun, exactly what you said, like funny and a bit friendly. It's not an academic work, even though I speak to academics, but trying to just kind of go, we're all in this together, let's try and figure this out, and trying to keep it a little bit down to earth, I suppose. What
you've just said there about men finding this sort of entire movement very uncomfortable, is it because they just would rather continue to benefit from, these sort of, the way things have always been? Do they just not care? Or, I mean, that discussions I've had, when you really nail it down, that's what comes across to me from men that I've spoken to. Men who I would say are not unpleasant people, but, really, when it comes down to it, it suits them.
Yeah, I mean, there is that. I mean, if you're looking at it as a social system and who's benefiting from the way things are at the moment in terms of gender, then it is men. I mean, there's a lot of men who deny the existence of a patriarchy and think it's a load of nonsense, but that's because they are it.
Yes.
and it's very, on the one hand, it's quite hard to see a lot of these issues as a man, particularly a white middle class man, because you just don't see the problem. Like, what's the problem? Everything's fine. I get treated all right. There's no prejudice. Yeah, well, that's you, but other people don't have the same experience. And, Grayson Perry talked a lot about this in his book and talked about men don't see masculinity. It's like a fish in water. It's literally what they exist in. They just don't get it. If you are a woman who's come from a certain background and is trying to get a job or is walking down the street, or their day-to-day life is different to what your experience might be as a man. Obviously, there's lots of different intersections throughout this, and there's not one blanket thing. But in general, there's a certain type of man who's very much favoured in society. And so on the one hand, those type of men might not see it. And on the other hand, they might not care. They might be enjoying it. And I suppose from that perspective, why should there be any onus on changing things if everything is cool for you, if everything is comfortable?
It's so funny because I was talking to my husband about this, and he came in from his little bloody room where he's cocooned himself to work for the last 12 months. And he went, Amy, is stale male pale? Is that a bad thing? So this has obviously come up in a meeting, right? And it's like, you're right, Martin, there is this sort of backlash in a good way, because it's kind of like, we don't really want to promote the white, straight, middle-class guy. Is there any diversity? Have we got any choice? Even if, on paper, maybe the other guy is better. That guy is sort of in figures with but they're looking at more than just money now. It's kind of like we need to sort of broaden our scope. We need to listen to different voices. So that's so true.
Yeah, and I think that part of this as well is that it's for those exact men's benefit as well. Really, it is, because the same things that perpetuate that system, which is not just about it just being men, but actual masculinity and the type of man who flourishes in this kind of system, which is still the kind of alpha male type, and all the things that come with that, which would be a focus on work. And I'm talking about the patriarchal centre here, I guess. Those things aren't particularly conducive to a happy life anyway. Yeah.
Even for those people.
Those people, yeah. I mean, all this, the mental health problems that men are having, the suicide statistics, the statistics on alcohol and drug addiction, violence, it's enormous. It is absolutely enormous. And when you start going through it, you look at why men are behaving in these extreme ways, and it is masculine expectations. I interviewed a guy who's in prison, who was in prison for stabbing someone, and we kind of traced it back into where he grew up, and came from quite a tough council estate. He was very impressed by the local gangster type figures in his local pub. He loved Goodfellas, he loved Sopranos, he loved all this stuff, and it got wrapped up into this romantic idea of that kind of man, who was a short guy, felt he was always little and less than everyone else. So the way that he's proved his manliness was to start carrying a knife, and which ended up with him stabbing someone and all this.
If he was just hugged, right? If he was just hugged and said, like, get it, let it out, cry. I do that with my 6-year-old boy now. I'm kind of like, let it out, get it out. We need to go from the root right up, don't we? Yeah,
you do. And I think that those things do make a difference. It does make a difference, if people are behaving and also allow themselves the freedom to feel, which a lot of men don't, or historically haven't. And I think that a lot comes from that because it's essentially, there's a real strand of individualistic, power-hungry male aggression that's very sort of selfish, and that, but also not very healthy as well. So I think an outlook whereby you are interested in other people and communities, in diversifying your workplace and your experiences as a man, these are healthy things to do. And giving up some of your, some of your privilege and your power, to do things like, spend a bit more time at home with the kids, do more things for yourself outside of work, just dismantling some of the pressures that you can put on yourself. I think it's a really healthy thing. And that's why, sorry to rattle on, but this is why it's quite interesting, what's going to happen in the post-lockdown world. Are we going to see dads, for instance, wanting to do 3 days at the office and 2 days at home because of the experience here? Or is it that they're so sick of their children they never want to see them again? I don't know. But I'm like, I think it's quite an interesting time, particularly now when life as we know has changed. How are things going to fall? Are they going to fall in a different way as we go forward? And I think it's quite an exciting opportunity to grab new things.
It's a really good opportunity. And I think Sarah Everard's murder was a sort of catalyst for a discussion about what men could do to be better allies of women. But especially at the beginning, I noticed men weren't really sort of joining in that discussion, and a lot of the women sort of saying, not all men, mothers of boys, wives of men, sisters of, my husband's not like that. And indeed the men as well, not all men, hashtag not all men. I mean, why do you think men are so reluctant to listen and learn and challenge that rhetoric? I guess it's human nature to be defensive, isn't it?
Yeah. And there's a certain amount of looking at their own personal lives and going, well, I'm not the type of man who would kind of do that. But it is frustrating. I've been finding it very, very frustrating because we've been running stories kind of on this issue and calling for a kind of look at the way that we're bringing up boys, the way we're behaving ourselves, the way our peers are behaving. And mostly the retorts that you get from men, well, they are retorts, the comments that you'll get from men sort of social media wise is generally along the lines of, well, there's nothing, what's the matter, it's not us, it's only a few different sort of it's only a few sort of psychopaths who are ruining it for the rest of us, you can't tar all men with the same brush and all this kind of stuff. But it's kind of like, well, someone's doing it. If 97% of women have had some kind of experience, and I don't know any woman that I've spoken to who hasn't had some kind of experience, somebody's doing it. And it's on such a level that there's pretty much no way it's not someone even if it's specifically not you. And I think there's a lot of head in the sand, basic delusional
going back
denial.
To what you were saying about when blokes in a pub just making sexist comments, racist comments, jokes, and nobody wants to. I mean, I suppose men need to be engaging in conversations about misogyny, let's say, with other men, and that might be their friends, their brothers, their fathers, their partners. So it's not just about educating boys now.
No, you're absolutely right.
A group of men in a pub when there's a few women sat there, take the women out of that equation. When those same guys are sitting around, who is going to be the one to call out to say, oh, mate, a rape joke? Really?
Yeah.
Who is going to be that one who, again, and this is a little micro example of you are going to, what are you willing to sacrifice? What are you willing to give up? Because are you going to be the one who's like, who's going to be the one who's going to have that sort of label of being like, you can't really say anything in front of John. He's very sensitive about, don't talk about how you slapped someone on the arse or kept going when someone said no because John doesn't like that. Everyone should be John.
I know, yeah. But that's it. I mean, we're looking at sort of, key values for men, strength and bravery. Well, that's where it is now. It's not lifting weights, is it? It's about calling out people in these matters. And I think there's a real conservatism in in men's groups, peer groups, with a small C, I should have said.
Yeah.
You know, a real sort of safety first approach, sticking with the herd and not wanting to upset things too much, which fosters bad behaviour.
You talk about in the book, you've got a whole chapter on tribalism and masculinity, which is, you know, that being one of the lads, blending in, you know, being the default, you know, white male, you know, and you talk about like there being like this kind of latent threat, you know, within male groups and also to others out of that, and that's presumably what you're saying there.
Yeah, this is part of the thrill of it in some ways. You know, bunch of lads out on the town together.
Yeah.
And getting a bit of a buzz off the fact that you might be a bit intimidating, you might be a bit wrong, you might take things too far, you know, egging each other on to do the worst joke you could possibly think of, you know.
God, that's so honest, Martin. And I do think a lot of people who'd be listening to this would be like, we don't have a massive male demographic listener, but we do have a lot of women who listen. And obviously, we all have men in our lives. I think that is so brave and honest of you, even just to that is an admission, isn't it? That the thrill of the chase a little bit and that sort of that buzz. It's all part of it, isn't it?
Completely. And this is also one of the reasons why a lot of men don't want to talk about these issues, because they know that they have seen it and been part of it in some way. It doesn't necessarily mean that they have been, you know, harassing someone, being a particular instigator, but they've been around it, you know, and there's just no way that most men, particularly sort of my age, in their 40s or whatever age really, that you haven't seen or been around something like that.
And then there's the guilt of that and the shame of that, isn't there?
There is, and you kind of don't want to be the one that's sort of like picked out. And I think, which, you know, I kind of get, but there has to become a point where you've got to put that to one side and go, well, what's the right thing? And, you know, and maybe, okay, you might not have to deal with all the things that you've been through, but do a bit of soul searching, have a look at what you've done, maybe talk about it with your mates and see how you move on from there. And try to write, you know, from this point on, for instance, move forward in a different way than you did before. Don't just keep it rolling.
No.
And I think I'm hoping that kind of stuff is going into conversations now, and that is being understood. You know, and that what will come from this is that even though men are being quite silent about it now, like, so when we're doing stories on the site, I don't really hear a lot of women going like, it's great that you're saying these things, or that you're listening, or you're reporting on what we're saying, but I don't hear that much from men, other than to kind of argue, just the kind of trolling stuff. And I think you need the male voices to start speaking up and going, I'm fully in support. We can't fix this
as women on our own. We can't fix this. We've done it. We carry our keys. We've got flat shoes on. We don't wear headphones when we're walking. Like, there's not an awful lot else we can do. We need the men, don't we?
But it is interesting that half of your audience on the website are women, because that almost makes me go, oh, you know, it's women taking up, right, we've got to sort this out, so let's
But I mean, this issue is not about female behaviour, it's about male behaviour.
Absolutely.
It's about men, so this should be about men doing it, not leaving everyone else to complain about it, where we're kind of like, oh right, I might listen for a bit, or, you know, I'll sign a petition or something, give a bit of money. It's like, no, there's something going on here. We need to have a proper look at this, especially because there's young lads in school. Well, that's what I was about to come on to. I mean, so this morning I looked at the there have been almost 10,000 anonymous testimonies from schoolgirls cataloguing acts of sexual harassment, abuse and assault in the UK. In UK schools, by UK schoolboys, and that's on that Everyone's Invited website that is in the news this morning. And that was raised 5 years ago. And we all know it happens. And we all know that teachers turn a blind eye. That's a fact, I think, you know. And it's an example of this sort of, oh, boys will be boys attitude. And I just wanted to get your thoughts on that, because it's clear to me that head teachers don't feel equipped to deal with this. And I've read a couple of accounts just this morning of head teachers blaming porn and alcohol and saying it's happening off site.
and the head of Dulwich College has shut down a protest by pupils. There's a lot, and to me, it feels like there's a lot of whinging and blame shifting when the simple fact is that these assaults are happening in schools and it's being disregarded. So, and everyone's jumping around now with assurances of appropriate action being taken, but it's clearly not. That's not happening. And so this website by a 22-year-old woman, I mean, I suppose that's what's needed, and what needs to happen presumably is lots of things: training, procedures in place, parental involvement, dads getting informed and being proactive. And have you got any plans to, your website is going to be is obviously a huge resource for all of that sort of stuff to happen. Have you got any plans going forward to work with other agencies?
Well, yeah. I mean, from our point of view, it's about giving a platform to lots of different voices who are working in this space. I mean, as you said, what I'm most interested in at the moment are the organisations or people who are going into schools and speaking to the boys. Like, I don't know how it works. That's the bit where I'm a bit mystified in these matters. Like, what is actually being taught to those young lads? Particularly, obviously in these boys' schools where it's a real, proper
testosterone soup, isn't it?
Yeah. And what's going on? Like, what? I mean, I've been trying to look into it, and I've been seeing there are some relationship lessons and some vague things like that. But I don't know if they're being. Well, clearly not. Clearly, this issue has been going on. That they're not particularly addressing things in the right way. I mean, I just feel like it's a massive social issue that involves sort of everyone. You can't kind of let anyone off the hook with it, really, because it's your pupils. It's not just stuff that's going on outside of school hours, and even then, they are still, especially for sort of a lot of these private schools, they are, if they are seen as a big representative of your school going out, and a lot of them have those values, then that needs to be followed through in every single way, doesn't it? But it's a hard one. It's a really hard one, I think, because obviously, these are children, right? The boys, I mean, obviously the girls are children who were suffering these terrible things, criminal things. The boys are children as well, who have not been educated in the right way. And I think there is certainly a certain digital culture that makes this kind of thing a lot easier to do, perhaps, and I'm including porn in this, but also the ability to take pictures, share them with your mates, all this stuff which is bringing out these nefarious little habits, I guess. But how are they developing amongst themselves to go down such a dark path? I mean, it really sounds frightening, the level of abuse that's going on. And I can only assume that it's because it's just purely because their education in these matters is purely from their peers. It's peer group stuff. It's the same thing that you get in knife crime, where your information is coming just from other boys. And so your values and the behaviour you're looking to is just that of maybe slightly older boys, not adults, not figures who've any experience, but just. And I think that just perpetuates behaviour, that whole idea of men egging each other on, doing wrong things. It's being quite funny. I think it all comes from that similar sort of space. And I don't think they've really had the shock of, this is fucking wrong. You can't do this.
And also, like you were saying before, Martin, it is traumatic for the women, for the girls, for the women, for the victims. But the trauma that is in store for those boys, that, like you were saying before, that sort of guilt and that shame, you're going to carry that around with you into your 20s, into your 30s. Like you're saying, fish in water, swimming around, not really knowing that anything's wrong. But now we're having, there must be 19, 20-year-old boys who are sort of like, oh God, I did take a picture of her giving me a blowjob and I put it all, like, shit, and so she was called a slag, and so she's got an eating disorder or whatever, just the repercussions. So the point that I'm making is, like, nobody's winning with this.
Nobody's. No, but I mean, you're really seeing, aren't you, why there are all these stats around sexual harassment of in this sort of adult world out in the streets and all this, because it is the men who are doing it and they're learning this stuff from when they're kids. They're doing it throughout their lives, and because it's not being picked up on, there's no reason to stop. They don't see anything particularly wrong. As a bloke, there is that strand of boys will be boys. This is what this is what you're supposed to be like. It's not even like it's wrong.
No.
This is kind of what you're supposed to be like.
Yeah, it is. Well, he's a red-blooded male, and
exactly, yeah.
We had last week Professor Jane Monckton-Smith, who has written a book about coercive control, domestic homicide, and she made a point that there are like all of these messages that boys will be boys, and also boys and men aren't meant to be fragile. All of those, she was just pointing out all the unhelpful messages that come from society, culture, religion, and even law. Because there are some places in the world where men having entitlement over women and over their families is actually written in law. So this is she was talking about a global problem. But and also I think Amy and I were talking about it before you came on. My youngest is 16, and then I've got kids in their 20s, and I can remember mothers of boys and girls, really, mothers and fathers all having that sort of attitude of well, that's just part of growing up. They're teenagers. They can't help it.
Yeah, there's this real sense of and being an animal. Boys are kind of like a bit like animals, basically, and it's gonna happen. And there's a kind of like, but that's a real get out, isn't it? It's like it's gonna happen. So we don't really need to do anything. Just, girls, protect yourselves.
Yes, absolutely.
Which is just mad, isn't it? It's mad.
Don't waken the beast.
No, that's what Jane Monckton said. She was just like, like there's this cultural truth that women should manage their own safety, and that men have a natural tendency towards violence, and we need to work really hard to keep that dormant in them.
And that plays upon you as a boy as well. So if you are not like that, for instance, if you might be a bit more of a sensitive type who is a bit sort of scared of that you feel like you're doing something wrong.
Of course.
You're not the type of guy, your boy, who can go over to a girl, and proposition her, or you were with her, you were dancing with her, and you didn't kiss her or something like that. You didn't try it on.
Yeah.
What's the matter with you?
Yeah, what's the matter
wrong?
with you? Yeah.
And that's scary. So you're actually educating boys to be in that way. And I do really feel like this is what happens when you do leave boys together unchecked. And it's the same goes for anything. There's something about, as a society, that we just assume that boys feel less, are not as sensitive as girls are, and so you just kind of just leave them to get on with it, and I think that leads to a lot of the mental health problems that you see as well in younger men, or at least the idea that you can't seek help for your mental health problems because you're not supposed to have them.
No.
You're a boy, you're supposed to be in touch with that, but we are humans.
Yes, and it's interesting, isn't it? Because that idea has come from, you go back. It was all middle-class men who have set up this. I mean, it's what the whole thing is built on, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, religion as a whole. I mean, I have a bit of a laugh about the Adam and Eve, and of Eve being plucked out of Adam's side, but of him being the original sort of male. And that being as the crux for a certain sort of strand of religion, but it's something that still gets touted around, and Jordan Peterson does a lot on that idea as well, of there being a certain hierarchy and a natural hierarchy at that. And I just think it's just an absolute madness, really. And it kind of and all it means to all it amounts to, right? All this stuff that amounts to, for me.
Oh, go on, Martin. Drop it on. Just in a nugget of wisdom. Just make it all right, because I feel so fucking overwhelmed.
No, go on.
All it amounts to, all this talk around the history and what can't change and what we can't do, is that we don't want to do anything.
Yeah.
Right? It just means we don't want change.
No.
Because we're okay. All these different ins and outs. I've been arguing with people on social media and all this kind of stuff. And I kept on putting that in there. It's like, all that you're really saying is,
you can't be asked.
If there's no real problem and women are exaggerating the problem and men are all right, is we don't want anything to change.
No.
Yeah.
And I think the point is that things are changing whether you fucking like it or not.
Yeah.
At the minute, things are changing. And I think that there's, social media on the positive side has given voice to a lot more people than it ever did before. And that's the difference.
Yeah.
You've got voices coming out there and lots of different perspectives. And suddenly the one that's filtered down from the top is not the only one. And I think that's sort of thrown everything up in the air. And social media has obviously, caused some horrific stuff as well. But it's kind of disturbed everything. And so it's a massive period of change. Things are happening that are different, and equality is rising more than it has, slowly, but it is happening. And it's a question of whether you're going to go with that and stay flexible and be interested in how things are changing, or are you going to cling to the past and go, men just needs to be James Bond again and everything will be all right. It's just,
Can I just, on that topic of social media, what's your opinion on, I've been thinking about this a lot recently, like lots of people I know are sort of my age, so I'm 51, and I know lots of people who are very dismissive of social media and will say, I don't have time for that, and I'm not, and to me it feels like you're being really blinkered, and because social media is really where you go now to get ideas and discussions that you would never normally have come across if you're just reading your same paper that you always buy, or getting your information from the same places. And so when people say to me now, and they say it in a very dismissive, as if they're almost slightly above it all, like, social media is a bit silly. And I just think, actually, you're just being pig ignorant. Get yourself on Twitter, get yourself on Instagram, start paying attention, Although, having said that, I also am very aware that on all of those things, I surround myself in my little bubble of people that think like me. And so there's that as well. But what do you think about people in their 40s, 50s who aren't engaging on social media? Do you think they really they're missing out? They need to get on with it and stop being.
It's hard, isn't it? There's plenty of great stuff on there if you want to find it, And I say on the issue of mental health, right? One of the major reasons why mental health is being talked about, people finding a lot more support, is because of social media, because they're finding routes to organisations that they wouldn't have had before, and you can follow sort of some famous sports stars or celebs, whoever you might idolise, is kind of sharing a behind the scenes sort of story about their lives that you wouldn't have had before. Even like The Rock is the classic example. In my day, we would have had Arnold Schwarzenegger, and you never saw any chinks in his armour or anything like that, or any family life. He was just gunning people down with an Uzi. But The Rock, he's there with his daughters, and he's talks about grief and his family dies, and it's he really brings out that emotional side to it. So there's a little bit more nuance in what you can discover about these people. If only people weren't also so really, really horrible as well.
Yeah, very reactive, aren't they?
Yeah, I just think, so there's some really dark and disturbing stuff out there. And I think there's a difference between free speech and giving different opinions and like really evil, criminal sort of trolling where you're giving death threats and rape threats and all this stuff. Like, I just think there needs to be proper policing of what is essentially a public space. Yeah.
And we've seen Thierry Henry come off social media, haven't we, in protest? And I think that, we're at the beginning of this social media thing. Like in 50, 60 years, they'll look back and go, Jesus, why wasn't it? Everyone was just running round, proverbial, metaphorical shotguns, in terms of the things that they were saying, and yes, like you say, passing it off as well. I can have my opinion. It's free speech, isn't it? But I do think the tide is turning, you know, that Piers Morgan thing was kind of like a really interesting thing of like, oh God, like just that the pettiness, but under this real microscope, and entitlement as well. Actually, it's quite interesting.
Yeah, well, you know, people can argue with him, and that's the difference, and that's why a lot of people, especially these commentators and journalists, are getting really annoyed, deeply annoyed, and sort of saying that they're being cancelled and things, because they haven't really experienced in the rest of their career the fact that people will have an issue with what they're saying and they can answer back. And actually, someone like Piers Morgan is not being cancelled. You've got
Absolutely
books out.
not.
You're on Twitter all the time. You can do anything.
Yeah,
your voice is very much out there. So it's not like that, but they're just not used to it.
No.
And again, you know, it's keeping it on the civilized side, isn't it, really, without it just becoming plain abuse for anyone.
Yeah.
And obviously things veer into that. But I don't know, it's just a really interesting time. You see, there's almost another vehicle for human expression. And of course, humans being humans, there's the good and the bad, there's the worst, there's everything.
It's the whole spectrum, isn't it?
It really is.
Yeah.
And the most extreme things within that are going to be the ones that get all the attention. So, yeah, and obviously fueled by the algorithms, it's like a male group, isn't it?
Yeah.
Egging each other on
I was also
algorithmically.
I was going to say before we spoke about sort of like the social side of calling stuff out, but I was also thinking about like, you know, if you work in a company, if you work in an organization, if you are in those groups in a professional sphere, and by talking out, speaking up, you risk losing that promotion. You actually risk the financial, like, God, I've got to pay my mortgage. I've got to go along with this. But it's interesting. At what point do you say to do the right thing, as you said before? Man.
I think this is the area for me. This is the thing, you know, workplaces. This is where the action needs to be. This is where it's all like, because this makes such a big difference, I think, to people's lives, and especially in terms of gender equality, when obviously the classic thing is a woman at a certain stage might have a baby, goodbye career kind of thing, you know, and which seems ludicrous that you can be punished for that effectively in terms of money and where you might drift in your career. And I think these are really easily solvable things. These are easy to do, just in terms of how you're promoting, what policies you have around parental leave. And part of that, by the way, is making sure that the dads are incentivized to take that time off for their benefit, as well as the mums and whoever else.
Because it is a bit like, oh, you're not going to take the 6 months, are you?
Exactly.
You know, like you're not a pussy, are you? You're not going to take the paternal leave, are you?
Oh, when I did mine, it was like confession. I had to go in and sort of say, I'm really sorry, but I'm having a baby. And they were like, oh, right. They were like, oh, right, okay. So when? And I was like, well, you know, it's going to be, I believe it's 9 months. and then it'll come out. But yeah, and it was like mad. It was a madness. But I put this in the book. I've done a few sort of talks at workplaces, and there's always a kind of, you know, there's obviously this mental health day that workplaces do now. And then this particular one was, it was for the women's organisation. I won't name the place I went to, but it was about women's issues within this massive big organisation. And they had a day when men came in and just talked through their issues as well, as they were trying to diversify things a little bit. And I sat there and did the talk, and then the CEO came in and sort of said, oh, well done, everyone, all this kind of stuff. And then sort of talked to the women in the room. He just started. And he said, you know, he kind of said, I'm really into equality and everything that you're doing here. And we're definitely going to diversify and bring more women up to board level on something. But we need to get profits up first, right? he said, you know, so we've all got to work hard and make sure we're in a good place for the business, and then we can start to develop this. And I heard that from another CEO as well. He said a similar sort of thing. So he was, and I get it, but he was sort of like saying, I can't just fire all my top guys and get rid of them all. You know, it has to be a process that you have to go through. But if that's the route and that's the thought from the top people at these companies, then things are going to change so slowly.
Yeah.
We're going to be here for another 120 years or whatever.
Yeah.
And it's just not the right thinking. And I understand the pressures that they're on because they've got investors and all the rest of it to bring in the profits. But unless there's a proper culture change at the very top amongst all these people who've really got the money and the power, then it just won't change, or it'll be so slow that it'll just take forever. So
I do think that is happening slowly. There was a recent story, wasn't there? The guys at the very top of KPMG, and he'd said like, did you know the story I'm talking about, Martin?
Yeah, I do,
like he'd said something, Louise, like all this bollocks about equality and stuff, and they were like, get him off. like wheel him out. And I don't know how much he still has to do, behind the scenes, but they don't want to be seen to be with the dinosaurs. So that is, let's say that's a positive, shall we?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, he's kind of accused everyone of being whiners, hasn't he, as well? Yeah. He's like saying you're all moaning and whining and all this stuff. And
he's gone to the Nigel Farage business school, hasn't he?
He did, yeah. I mean, there's proper legislation within all this as well, or at least there was like a governing body that had said, I think it was something like, we need 40% of the top companies to have at least 50% female board members by, I think it was 2021, which
we are.
They failed. Oh. Yeah, so they missed it. But it was rising. It was rising. So things are changing. But I suppose the generally the message that I'm getting to men is don't resist it with all your might.
Yeah.
This is a good, powerful change that has been made. Embrace it. It's happening anyway. So get on board with it. But also, take that opportunity to expand your life a little bit more as well. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like your work is not the be all and the end all of it.
No.
And actually that kind of working culture, which has been very male at the top and very much one note and very alpha, has destroyed so many men in its time. It's ridiculous.
It chews them up and spits them out, doesn't it? As we were saying at the beginning.
Yeah. And it's also I also just think there's a certain responsibility that comes when you've got a certain amount of power and money to start dealing with it in the right way, not just purely accumulate more for your own gain. Start wielding it and start looking at the next generations and how they're going to exist within this. Yeah. Just feels like a moral responsibility, and perhaps there's been a time that we've been in where that's not particularly been on the agenda too much. It's just been about an individualist grab for whatever you can possibly get. And I'd like to think things again post-pandemic or post-lockdown at least will sort of mean that people have reassessed the values. I'm hoping.
Do you know what? I've just thought of the story arc of Mary Poppins. You know how Mr. Banks starts off with his like G&T on the side, and at the end he's like, "Oh, it's about family, guys. We've got the that's the play. That's
done.
The play.
The information was out there all this time ago.
Yeah,
that's brilliant, Amy.
It's Mr. Banks. Come on, he told us. Yeah, should be mandatory screening, shouldn't it?
Yeah, sure. That's what we need to
for
show.
all men. I'm sure they'll respond to that.
Absolutely.
That's just that in my sort of musical theatre mind. I'm just like, oh god, there it is. So I think we have covered everything.
Yeah.
I mean, your book, as we've said, it's funny, friendly. We'll put all the links to everything. The resources for men and women, and let's get informed. Let's start having these conversations. And you've got a whole community on that website, haven't you? So it's there.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah, and we run stories from lots of people who just write in and have got a story to share. Yeah.
I noticed that your headline today was an article saying, "Dads, sort your fucking kids out, your boys out,
fucking sons out." Yeah.
That was funny. Yeah, we've got one of our guys is an ex-SAS.
Yeah.
Sort of sergeant, and so it was his perspective, and I'm trying to get loads of different perspectives on the same topic, and his one was particularly very strident, let's put it that way, but he was like zero tolerance. He's like, get involved and get it sorted out.
That's the sort of approach I like as well. I just like stop your fucking whinging and get on with it.
Yeah. But, sometimes you need that, and certainly, we can go.
But it's a good mixture of. It's not being, your website is there was that, and then there's, it is really friendly and in sort of encouraging and supporting men to engage with conversations, with other men.
Yeah, it's not preached on high. It's like we're all in the same boat. I'm as messed up, and I've got dysfunctional, and all. I'm as bad as anyone else. If you want to put it like that. But it's kind of, I'm interested in what's changing and how we can work together to sort of simply, improve ourselves and be happier. That's kind of all it is, really.
Yeah.
So,
and can you imagine if? I mean, I don't know. I'm kind of casting aspersions that maybe your dad wasn't having these conversations when you were a young guy.
No, it's not something that you do, especially from Yorkshire as well.
Amy.
From Yorkshire.
My dad was really progressive. He was actually a feminist. but can you imagine your kids now? They're hearing these conversations going around your dinner table, no doubt, when you're... So it's in the air, and it needs to be in the air as you're growing up.
100%. And also it goes straight back up to those older generations as well who haven't gone anywhere. I mean, it causes some very awkward conversations.
Oh, yes.
But at least they're kind of happening, as tentative as they are.
Absolutely.
And however, you still need to be drinking while you do it.
Yes, of course.
It's really interesting time. It really is.
Yeah. Well, thank you ever so much for coming and talking to us today.
No, thanks for having me. No, I really enjoyed that. Thank you.
A podcast from producer Paul